one fun thing that I like to do with especially aspiring PMs is I ask them, all right, what's your dream company? And sure, a lot of them tell me Google, Microsoft, Apple. And then I ask them, that's cool. So what about Google? Like if you were a PM for Google, what do you want to work on? And that's where they get stuck. I'm like, do you want to be a PM for Google search or for Google Ads, which is one of their biggest businesses? I'm like, maybe not. Maybe that doesn't sound exciting to you. So suddenly being a PM at Google is like, maybe this is not what I wanted to do. Or Microsoft. And I tell them, would you like to be a PM for Office? I spoke with another one who told me Amazon. And I was like, cool. Do you want to be a PM for the banner that is at the top of Amazon's website? Because there's a PM for that. And so when you start asking these questions about like, sure, brand is one thing, but then you have to dive deep into the specifics, then suddenly the vision of Google starts to dilute, or maybe it gets you even more excited depending on your goals.
Ciao, io sono Marco Imperato e questo è il podcast di Product Heroes. Product Heroes è il punto di riferimento in Italia per il product management. Finora abbiamo aiutato oltre 180.000 persone tramite master, formazioni in azienda, guide, articoli e meetup. Lo facciamo anche attraverso questo podcast in cui intervisto product leader che spaccano e che potranno darti tantissimi consigli utili per migliorare il tuo modo di costruire, lanciare e muovere le metriche del tuo prodotto. Oggi sono con Diego Granados. Quella di oggi è proprio una puntata speciale. Diego è infatti Senior Product Manager in PayPal, ha lavorato in LinkedIn e in Microsoft, ma soprattutto Diego è un product coach. Su pmdiego.com e sul suo canale YouTube puoi trovare un sacco di materiale utile che potrà aiutarti a preparare le tue prossime interviste per un cambio di carriera o per ottenere il lavoro da product manager dei tuoi sogni. Con Diego parliamo proprio di questo, quindi di come prepararsi per le interview, di cosa valutano gli headhunter o gli hiring manager in azienda, di cosa sta cercando chi assume un nuovo product manager, di come creare una storia coerente ed efficace e di mille altre cose super utili se in questo momento stai pensando a un cambio di carriera o ad ottenere il tuo primo lavoro da product manager. Prima di iniziare, se ancora non l'avessi fatto, ti chiedo di lasciarci una review a 5 stelle, mi raccomando, sulla piattaforma su cui ci stai ascoltando. Questo ci aiuterà a raggiungere ancora più utenti e a diffondere più velocemente la cultura di prodotto in Italia, che poi è la nostra missione. Ancora un'ultima cosa prima di cominciare. Ti ricordo che abbiamo riaperto le vendite della Product Heroes Conference di ottobre. Quest'anno già da subito sarà una delle più grandi product conference in Europa e ospiteremo fino a 1000 persone. Rimangono poco meno di 200 biglietti, per cui se ancora non avessi acquistato il tuo, ti consiglio di farlo adesso. Adesso non mi resta che augurarti buon ascolto e ricordarti che dopo i tempi duri vengono sempre i tempi eroici. Hi Diego, welcome to Product Heroes.
Marco, thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here. I like counting the hours to start this conversation. So we can start from your path, your journey.
Yeah.
How did you get to become a PM in such a big tech companies in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that I haven't had the pleasure to meet that are listening to this, I am from Mexico. I was born and raised in Mexico. And I always had this idea of I want to work in tech. But in Mexico, like in many other places at the time, there was sure a few tech companies, but not necessarily as many as you can see in some parts here in the US or in Europe and many other places around the world. So I thought that if I studied engineering, that could be a good entry into the world of technology. So I studied electric engineering, and I actually never learned how to code. When I graduated, I couldn't find a great job as an electronic engineer. And I ended up in a consulting firm. And it was, I think, one of the best things that happened to me when I was younger, because I got the opportunity to, still see the engineering side of, how to build something for a customer. But then I also got to experience a lot more on the working with customers, working with data, understanding, how customers or how they would run their business. And I would use their data to help them with that. So it was a business intelligence consulting firm. After about 5 years of doing that, I wanted something different. I didn't want to stay in business intelligence. I wanted to do something different. I didn't know exactly what. I just wanted something different. And I realized as I was applying to different jobs that every time I applied, for example, for a marketing position, they would call me and say, Diego, we love your profile, but we would love for you to apply to our business intelligence position instead. And so would you be open to that? That happened 2-3 times. And I realized, all right, I need a big change for me. And that big change ended up being my MBA. And I came to the US in 2015 to do an MBA in Duke University. I had no idea what I wanted to do after. Even though in my essay I wrote a ton of things of what I wanted to do, but I just didn't know exactly what I wanted. And on my first year, I learned about product management, and I said, you know what, this sounds interesting. Sounds like the things that I like about consulting. Sounds like it doesn't have things that I don't like about consulting. So let's try it out. Long story short, ended up getting a summer internship at Cisco as a product manager. And from there, I just began my career as a product manager. I ended up going to Cisco, then 2 years later, move on to Microsoft to work in AI and machine learning, learn about new technologies, learn about AI, then moved back to California to work for LinkedIn for about a year. Tech market happened, and now I find myself at PayPal, once again working in AI and machine learning. And so that's a little bit of my story, but it was almost an accident that I became a product manager thanks to my MBA. I didn't know about product management before that.
Great. But what's pmdiego.com? How did you get this idea? What's the story behind it? Because
Yeah.
I mean, you are a product manager right now, but you have something like 122,000 followers on LinkedIn. You're building something great. Maybe you don't realize how great it is right now. I can tell you. How did you become a product coach? How did you add this idea?
In 2020, I was in Seattle, and COVID happened, and Seattle in the US was complete lockdown. And when I said complete lockdown, the only thing that was open for months or maybe for a year was going to buy groceries, and that was pretty much it. And so when things happen and things were really bad, I always had that idea of like, is there something I can do to help or not? I was stuck in the US, my family was abroad, and I couldn't leave the country. So I had all these questions of like, what do I do? And of course, I could have spent my time watching more TV shows. I binge watch practically all of Netflix. And one day, on my LinkedIn feed, I saw a post from a group of product managers from Google who said, hey, we are a group of PMs from Google, and we are helping people, especially PMs who are losing their jobs because of COVID. So if you want to sign up and just do some coaching, resume review, stuff like that, welcome. I thought that could be a good way for me to help somehow with this whole COVID situation, at least put a little bit of a grain of sand into the chaos. And at the end of that experience, it was like a month or so, the founders of this group asked me if I was willing to do a presentation for a group of students about what is product management and how to get into PM. So I said, sure, let's do that. And after the presentation, 25 of the students reached out to me for coffee chats. And I was like, guys, I love this, but I don't have time for 25 coffee chats. So let me see if there's another way that I can answer your questions. And I asked them, give me your questions, and then I'll figure out something. And I received the questions. Most of them were practically the same. And I was like, all right, this is good. I'm getting the same questions. I can answer one of them and spread the word. So after 4 weeks of figuring out what do I do, how do I do it, I decided to record my first video on YouTube. I was very nervous. It was incredibly stressful. It took me another month to film and edit. I had to literally go to YouTube and be like, how to edit, how to add a title to my video. And that was the beginning. I said, hey, listen, I distributed it to the students, and I was like, guys, here's something that I recorded for you. Let me know what you think, and if you like it, I'll record something more. And after that, they liked it. They asked me more questions, so I kept recording videos. And I said, oh, you know what? This is something interesting. I think people like it. Let me, post about it on LinkedIn. Maybe others will like it as well. And then I started writing on LinkedIn, and people liked it more on how I wrote and my videos. And it just kept growing until they started asking me more and more questions and for coaching sessions and for a lot of things. Fun fact, for 3 years, because of my visa in the US, I couldn't charge any money. Like I got zero revenue from Google AdSense, from nothing for 3 years because I just couldn't for my visa. Anyway, long story short, that was the beginning of pmdiego.com because people were asking me, and I was like, where do I direct them? How do I put my resources? And I was thinking of names of, like a company and stuff like that. But in the end, I thought, you know what? People know me for being Diego and being a product manager. So let's just be PM Diego. And that was the story.
Can you give us some figures of what you're doing? So how many people are you reaching? How many people have you already helped in their career path?
Starting with, social media numbers. So YouTube is about 30,000. subscribers. LinkedIn is about 120. Twitter is about 14,000. I'm starting both Instagram and TikTok, and they're in the lower hundreds or thousands. So definitely the reach is there for the product management community. I started a newsletter that has been a little bit hard to keep up with, but it also has like 9,000 subscribers to a newsletter. So there's definitely numbers in this outreach, but without having a call to action, without having materializing those numbers into something, it's just vanity numbers. It doesn't tell you anything. So in terms of helping people, I honestly have lost count, but I have hundreds of testimonials on my course that I launched a course. Just to give you an idea, I launched a course. This is the effort of 3 years of not charging any money for any of this, and then suddenly releasing a course. So my YouTube channel, I talked a lot about product management, how to get into PM and PM interviews. And when I launched my course, I was expecting, 5 people to purchase my course. It's about how to deep dive into product management interviews. In 1 week, I think I crossed 500 students. The revenue that I got from that, from the 6 months of last year, was good enough for my accountant to go crazy with like, dude, we need to figure out a way to make sure that the IRS in the US doesn't stay with all your money, which is great. It was a great signal that I think I found something that is really helpful, that people are enjoying. So I honestly don't have, and this is really bad on my side, I don't have a concrete number on how many people I've helped, but at least once a week, and probably much more, I receive someone who says, Diego, I watched your videos and got my offer to startup all the way to
Great.
fan companies.
That's enough. So but basically you're getting traction. That's the point. So you start your path as a career coach by nailing a specific problem, like people are finding hard to get hired as a product manager. But what's the most common problem you're finding? Do you have a general problem all the people are facing kind of is always the same, or there are so many different segments, so many specific situations, and so you have to calibrate your help basically?
Yeah, it's a little bit of the latter. It's more on the everyone. Sure, everyone has a different story, but I think regardless of their backgrounds, everyone is at a different stage in their transition. Some of them are, almost there, and all they need from me, from a coaching perspective, is just to help them make that small jump, tweak their resume, tweak their LinkedIn, and they start getting interviews. Others are at a very early stage where they're like, I'm learning about product management and I work in XYZ thing and I have no idea how to get there. So the type of work that I do with them has to be more extensive, more robust, set expectations, set timelines, because I think the common factor is that everyone thinks that getting into product management is something I can do over the weekend and boom, done, I'm going to get a job, right? So that's super important. And it, like I said, it doesn't matter your background or your experiences. What matters is at which stage are you in that path to transition. So that's how I segment the different aspiring PMs, and that's what makes it hard to make, here's a template to break into PM. No, everyone's path is different and at different stages.
Yeah, you are totally right. I think that what most people get wrong about becoming a PM, I mean, we sell training for product management, like master classes, but there is this strange perception in which, okay, since you have the skills, you are getting the job. It's like 1 + 1, okay, equal 2. While what we find is that it may take months, especially for someone who's not into technology, who's starting to approach technology for the very first time. And so, what could be your advice for one guy that maybe is listening to us, want to become a PM? Maybe he has the skill, but doesn't have any idea of how to face the next challenge, that is getting a real PM job.
I think this applies also to current PMs who want to make the jump into other kinds of roles. Let me just give you a brief example of what I mean, and the advice will apply to both. So I get a lot of I also coach a lot of PMs, current PMs with 1, 3, 5, 10 years of experience, who have been, in B2B enterprise and suddenly they want to make the jump to consumer, or who work in front end and suddenly wants to do AI machine learning, and they struggle in the same way that that an aspiring PM struggles. Is they have some skills, sure, but they don't know how to make that jump, make that transition. So to your question, for someone, whether it's an aspiring PM or a PM who has the knowledge, has some of the skills, and is struggling to get that next step, what most people fail to realize is that product management is not one job that is the same at all companies. So just because you work cross-functionally, you have led projects, you have dealt with ambiguity and all the soft skills that we can name about product management, that's not going to make you a product manager. What I've seen in many cases, for example, I know pharmacists who became product managers, and people are like, wow, how do you do it? And that's when the 1+1 makes sense, because it's like they were pharmacists, and then suddenly they decided to go to a health tech startup, and they brought their expertise as a pharmacist. In a startup, they kind of did a little bit of everything until they shaped their career into becoming a product manager. And once they got those skills, now they jump into some other company that could be bigger, that could still be in the health tech space. So then suddenly it's like, that makes sense. They didn't go from pharmacist to Google Cloud product manager. They trace a path on something that would help them tell their story. The story is incredibly important. So to me, just to quickly summarize, the most important next step for any aspiring PM or current PM wanting to transition is to focus on your story. How are you going to create your story to say, I've got all this experience and sure, the transferable skills, and how does that make sense with the next role that I want to take? And sometimes getting to that dream job takes 2-3 hops, but you have to think about what is that immediate next step that fits within your story.
So basically, you have to. It's like us managing a product. So you have a problem, you have a very challenging goal, you have a strategy. But talking about the story and storytelling, like a recruiter point of view, how a good story relate to us, the recruiter, will evaluate the PM? Because what normally think is, okay, I'm going to do a job for which I need specific skills. So why do I need a story?
I was making a transition from Microsoft to LinkedIn. Microsoft and Cisco for me were enterprise, 100% enterprise, typical PM job where you work with sales, you do proof of concept, you work for months with one customer, you ended up presenting, like typical B2B enterprise. LinkedIn was consumer, and I made that jump because of my story, because the way that I framed my story to the recruiter, to the people at LinkedIn, was like, listen, I've got all the product management skills. If you ask me to go and do execution, I can do execution. If you ask me to go and convince stakeholders, like, I can do that stuff all day. Eyes closed, I can do it. There's no problem. I understand that I don't have the consumer, fine things that are needed in product management, but I have the knowledge of what the problem is for LinkedIn users, and I know how to solve it because I've been helping people to find jobs on LinkedIn. And the job that is open there, the job that I'm applying to, is precisely that: how to help people to find jobs better / faster. So by being able to tell that story, of course, in a nice way, 2-3 minutes to a recruiter and to a director of product, I was able to convince them, like, hey, I need some help from you on the coaching side for my transition from enterprise to consumer, but I've got the PM experience. I know the problem and I solve it every single day that I'm on the platform. I just need your help with some of those skills, like A/B testing, like a lot more data driven than PM in enterprise. So that's what the story helps you with, to make some of those jumps, some of those transitions. And recruiters and hiring managers and product people at companies, that's what they want to know.
Okay, so basically you have to mitigate risk for them and increase the possibility to be right, because no one want to be wrong, obviously.
Right.
So with a compelling story, you're basically help them to understand that you are the right choice.
Right. And just to add one more thing. So when especially aspiring PMs try to talk with a recruiter and they're like, listen, I've got, all the energy in the world and I want to show you that I'm super capable, give me the opportunity that I can do it. And they don't have a compelling story of, listen, I don't have the title of product manager, but here's all the things that I've done at school, at work, at home, whatever, to show that anything that it's about product management, I'm capable of doing it. When they don't have that story, the recruiter will say, well, it's great that you got the energy, but we want someone with the energy and with at least the skills to make sure that they can do the job.
I would like to discuss about the three main steps. So resume, interview, test. We have one question from our community. So talking about the resume, which are the best thing and the worst thing a recruiter can read on a resume? So something you don't have to do, no matter what, and something is better you do on working with your resume.
Something to avoid, and this is something that I've learned so I've, from my YouTube channel, I've interviewed recruiters and chatted with them. I'm like, hey, is this real? Like, do you read in 6 seconds? Is the ATS rejecting you? And all those kind of things. I think the some of the biggest don't do this. We as applicants, there's a lot of, and I don't understand why, because I was also in that group, but we have a lot of misconceptions about how the recruitment process works. We think that a recruiter will, first of all, we apply, and then the ATS is going to accept or reject your application, which means it's a robot, it's an AI, something like that. Then we think that if your resume is seen by a recruiter, they will see it, 6 seconds, gone, and they would decide at that moment. And then it gets to the hiring manager. That's how most of us imagine the process. The reality is that the ATS is going to help recruiters. So I interview people, and I've interviewed at Microsoft, when I was at LinkedIn, and now at PayPal. And the ATS helps us to basically have the candidate's information, the resume, their profile, any highlights from the recruiter. So because of this misconception that it's about AI and it's about a robot that rejects you, the biggest mistake that I see people do is, oh, for product management, I need to work cross functionally, lead without authority, deal with ambiguity, and they just put those keywords as part of the resume in a skills section that is this big, right at the top. And here's a problem, right? If I'm a recruiter or a hiring manager and I read that, Marco, you put leadership, am I to assume that you're a good leader, that you were able to lead a group of one or a group of 300? I have no context on the word leadership. So that is one of the biggest mistakes, that people focus much more on throwing keywords to quote unquote pass the ATS, instead of focusing, this is the opposite of like what you should do. Instead of focusing on how can I write an accomplishment, and I'll talk briefly about that in a moment. How can I write an accomplishment that highlights or that puts emphasis on I can be a good leader and I can influence without authority? That's what recruiters and hiring managers will care about. They don't care about the keyword. They care that you show that you can do it. Just to wrap it up on the, so don't do skills as, just a list of keywords. And then on the do side, write accomplishment. An accomplishment is simply a way to say, this is what I did, here's how I did it, and this is the impact that I had. Sometimes impact can be numbers. Sometimes impact can be as simple as I helped the engineering team to reduce the time to do blah, 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 so on and so forth. It's what I did, how did I do it, and what was the impact of that thing that I do in the context of the skills, like transferable skills like leadership or working cross-functionally.
Excuse me, Diego, can you clarify what an ATS
Yeah,
is for who's listening to us?
absolutely. ATS is applicant tracking system. When you apply to a job, imagine it's the misconception is that it is an AI tool that is going to determine whether or not you've got the skills. The reality is that it's more like a file cabinet where your resume and your information is stored. And the ATS, that's the first step. But the ATS really, from an interviewer point of view, when a recruiter tells me, Diego, we need you to interview someone, I log on to a portal that is part of the ATS where I see this is the candidate, this is my date of interview, here's the resume, their LinkedIn profile, any notes from the recruiter, and then my opportunity to give feedback.
So great. I followed your advice. I get my interview. I'm super nervous. So what's your advice? Is there a framework that can help us to have better interviews? I mean, the question is very similar to the one we had before. Is there like a general path for an interview, or it could be super different among different like roles? Scale up, startup, corporate, B2B, B2C, AI, front end, back end. And how can I prepare to it?
Right. It is different. Let's say that at the core, in the middle, all the interviews will have the same type of questions. But then, depending on if you're interviewing for a startup versus for a company like Google versus for a mid-sized company for something specific, they will have different types of skills they'll assess. Let me give an example. Every single company is going to ask you, tell me about yourself, right? Every single company is going to ask you behavioral questions related to product management. One typical one that most of us have encountered is something like, tell me about a time when you had a conflict with engineers, because PMs work with engineers all, if not most of the time. If you're going to work in something front end, something that's going to be seen by users, then you're going to get a question about working with designers because they want to see how you interact with them. So there's common things related to product management. Then depending on the company, now is more and more and more adopted is you're going to get, especially for aspiring PMs, of course, you're going to get questions like, how would you improve products? How would you improve your favorite product, a product about the company, a product you don't like? So things about how do you think like a product manager? I want to understand that. And that's kind of, I would say, the three components: an introduction, behavioral questions, and product design questions is the most common thing for every single PM interview until you become a manager. Once you become a manager, it's mostly experiential, behavioral, high level strategy. But associate PM, PM, senior PM, principal PM, it's kind of the same. And then what I was saying earlier to your question is, well, does it change if it's a startup, if it's a big tech company? The answer is yes. When you think about a startup, is they don't care if you can answer a question like, why did Amazon acquire Whole Foods? What they care about is that you understand a little bit of the industry, that you can go, dive deep into using data. So their questions don't necessarily are going to be behavioral. They can be situational to what the company is experiencing. And there's absolutely no fantastic way to prepare that, but there's a lot of research you can do on the company, on the industry, on understanding the market so that you can answer their questions. They don't expect you to be an expert on the market or the industry, but they expect that you at least have some knowledge, because going for a startup is risky for them to hire someone, right? Given that they need a lot of funding. Let me just wrap it up with something, with one more thing, and then I'll pass on to, and now how do I prepare? And the bigger the company that you go for, the more structured and standardized it's going to be. If you just search for interview questions for Google, Meta, Facebook, whatever company, it's a pool of questions that is not going to be very different from each other. It's pretty standardized. So the higher you go in terms of size of the company, much more standardized. The lower you go in terms of size, like a startup, more specific to them than a general PM application.
For what we get, obviously, there will be a huge difference between startup, corporate, more structured companies, and probably, as it is my personal point of view, maybe you think, and this is my experience, maybe you think you want to work for Google because Google is Google, okay?
Right.
Everyone wants to work. But maybe is not what you really want. So maybe you would you would enjoy much more working on a very small startup, being like the first PM,
Yeah.
the second PM. So my personal advice is even to calibrate not just the expectations, but what you really want, and not how you will be judged after you get the job. This just
100%.
what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, 100%. And by the way, one more thing that is going to affect your interview is going to be whether you're going for a PM, technical PM, AI, machine learning PM, and so that's also going to affect the type of questions that you get in an interview. But to your point, I think one fun thing that I like to do with especially aspiring PMs is I ask them, all right, what's your dream company? And sure, a lot of them tell me Google, Microsoft, Apple, and it's fair. Like we've all had that dream at some point in our careers, or maybe we still do. And then I asked them, that's cool. So what about Google? Like if you were a PM for Google, what do you want to work on? And that's where they get stuck. I'm like, do you want to be a
They have
PM
no idea.
for Google search or for Google Ads, which is one of their biggest businesses? I'm like, maybe not. Maybe that doesn't sound exciting to you. So suddenly being a PM at Google is like, maybe this is not what I wanted to do. Or Microsoft. And I tell them, would you like to be a PM for Office? Because there's a PM that focuses just on one of the tabs and the few things that are placed in the tab. Would you like to be a PM for that? I spoke with another one who told me Amazon. And I was like, cool. Do you want to be a PM for the banner that is at the top of Amazon's website? Because there's a PM for that. There's an entire
Obviously.
group for that. And so when you start asking these questions about, like, sure, brand is one thing, but then you have to dive deep into the specifics, then suddenly the vision of Google is starts to dilute, or maybe it gets you even more excited depending on your goals.
Thanks to this podcast, I get to know a lot of people. They work inside the companies you already mentioned. And working at Google doesn't mean anything. Like by working at Google Cloud, like for corporates, maybe you manage one client for your entire life. While you can work on Google Maps, on AI, or other products. A couple of weeks ago, I had this chat with Chiara, who was working at WhatsApp business. That is inside Meta, totally different for working at like the feed inside Meta ads, or Instagram shop. There are super different jobs. And what do you think about like the motivation you have? So this thing that I don't know if is undervalued in your opinion, to be really engaged with the company and you don't want just a salary increase. Does it matter? Does the recruiter perceive it or not?
You mean like if you are someone who
Really passionate about the company in which you're jumping. Does it make any difference or not, in your opinion?
I think what makes a difference is more on the personal side. Like I've had companies who reach out to me, and at times when I'm like, oh, that's a cool company. They're working on something really nice. But I know that I'm coming from big tech in California that pays really, really, really well for big tech because of the competition. And if it's a smaller company, I know they're not going to be able to reach the same salary or even better, right? Because when you transition, typically the advice is like, oh, you should negotiate to go up in your salary, right? So I think that passion about the product, the company, the mission, whatever it is, to me, it's something personal. And if you're okay with sacrificing maybe some of that salary, total compensation for pursuing something that you are really excited about. To your question about the recruiter, I think the biggest difference is that you have to make it clear to them, because if they know that you work for Google, Microsoft, whatever company, and they're paying you really well and they can't match that, it's unlikely that they'll move you in the process, not because you're not good,
Hmm,
but because they know it's
interesting.
unlikely they can match. But if you're upfront about that and say, listen, to me, my priorities in my career are X, Y, and Z, and money is not one of them, and we can talk about numbers at the end. I really want this job. Then you give them an opportunity to move you through the process, and then you can figure out on your own about whether or not you care that much about the money.
Let's jump to a question coming from our community. So the guy is Daniele that is asking, Diego, do you have any advice for someone who is about to take an assessment test for a product manager position? Then I realize that it can depend on a lot of things, but let's keep in mind that what will be evaluated will be only the approach to the problem as a PM.
Yeah, this goes a little bit back to the question of how do you prepare for the interviews. It's the same thing on
Okay.
how do you prepare for a take-home assignment, right? Which I have a love-hate relationship with them, because I also had to do a few for PayPal and others. And when you think about take-home assignments, the same way that you think about preparing for product design questions, strategy questions, is they don't care about the answer as much as they care about your approach to getting to that answer. So
Okay.
sometimes in these take-home assignments, they will ask you, oh, help us with the roadmap. But they don't just care about the roadmap, right? That's not how product managers, that's not how we work. We start from a problem, we start from a goal, we know our users, we know the market, we know competitors, we draft a strategy, we create a vision, we understand the user journey to identify what should we focus on. And once we do that, then we create a hypothesis, we create a process to test that hypothesis, whether it's as simple as creating some mock-ups or a prototype. And once we validate our idea, then we go into development and we go into our roadmap that includes the MVP, phase one, phase two, phase whatever. So when you get some of these take-home assignments, you have to think that they care about, can you show us how to arrive to that piece that they're asking you about, the roadmap, the viability or feasibility of the product. Even, for example, I had a case for PayPal because I'm an AI machine learning PM. I had a case about AI and machine learning, and I just couldn't simply jump into AI and machine learning. I had to show, all right, before we jump into the technical aspect of it, let's start with, we've got these users and we've got these problems. Now, how do we solve those problems? And then start going through a step-by-step approach. And it's exactly the same thing for product design, strategy, everything else. Don't just simply say, how do I improve my favorite product? Boom, done. Here's a problem that I have. Let's go and solve it. PM start from a goals. They talk about users. They talk about pain points. They talk about prioritization. They talk about testing hypotheses. So the biggest takeaway from when you have a take-home assignment is approach it like a product manager would, and don't focus simply on the question they're asking you. The question they're asking you will be part of that process, but not just the only part of the process. Let me finish one more thing. The biggest problem I see most people do in take-home assignments is you only have typically half an hour to present, and they ended up getting like 50 slides. So you don't have time for 50 slides. Is be concise, be short, go to the point, show them what they need, but show them the process that you took to get from here's a problem and here's how I'm planning to solve it.
Quick question. Can you get a job as a PM without having any coding or development experience?
100%. Actually, let's put that 99%. I'll explain why. 99%. If you tell me, Diego, I want to be an AI machine learning PM, but I have no clue about coding and no CS background, that's the 1% where I'll be like, it's going to be unlikely. It's going to be really hard, right? But if you're telling me, Diego, I'm going for a product manager job, it's front end or it's growth, it's about experimentation, it's something that is not related to a technical aspect of it, then yeah, absolutely. You don't need, I know, these are my probably 3 favorite stories of people I've met. I know this person. She was for 10 years a professional basketball player, playing in Europe, actually. After 10 years, COVID happened, games were canceled. She was like, I need to do something. Ended up talking to a startup, a part of a circle. So she ended up knowing the founder, and she went from basketball player to product manager. Then I knew this guy who for 40 years was an opera singer, really great. And pandemic happened. The show's canceled. And he one day was thinking, what do I do? So he went back to his alma mater where he studied opera. He saw that they had problems with their app, their website. They didn't have a few projects. He volunteered to make a project for them to basically improve everything about how to store their data, bring them back to the community. And he used that experience to now become a product manager. And the third one is this guy. He has been in retail, or was in retail, for 17 years in a store, going up the ranks, until one day he was like, we should do this better. We should do that better. Why don't we, even something as simple as creating an Excel file to improve the operations of the store. He took that to management, and long story short, then he became the product manager for that product for the entire company. And I think he only has, if he hears this, he's going to kill me because I don't remember. I think he's only got high school or something like that. Right. So when someone tells me, do I need to be a software engineer or know how to code? My answer is no, unless you're going for a very, very technical role.
Basically, a lot of people are learning from you and from your day-to-day activity. But what are you learning from the people you are coaching? So what's the biggest learning you had from coaching others? I think is a huge opportunity for you because you get to know a lot of people. But what the most important, the most interesting thing you learned until now?
I love this question because I can answer it in different ways. Depending on what your goal is with coaching, is what you'll find most interesting in what I'm going to share as the best things that I've learned. From a recognition point of view, sure, I've been one day, Ravi Mehta, ex chief product officer from Tinder, he sent me a message like, Diego, I'm nominating you for a leader coach award that I'm putting together at this company, and I got an award, and I was like, that's pretty cool. I got nominated to best PMs, influencers, and coaching from many companies, including product school. And so if recognition is for you, like I've gotten things like that. If getting to meet people is important, getting to know people like you who invite me to their podcast to chat, and after this, I'm sure that we'll keep talking to each other and creating projects together. That's also something cool. When it comes to learning about am I a good coach for my career, because eventually PMs typically manage other PMs, so getting to understand how others express themselves, how they feel, especially in more junior roles, and they look up to me for guidance, helps me prepare for when I become a manager of other PMs. And then the last one that I'll say is another fantastic thing. If you think about it, for me, my side project is about helping people to break into PM, and there's absolutely no better way to know what problems I need to solve than talking to my customers. So by understanding what questions they
Customer
ask me,
discovery.
what do they struggle with, and when I test, try this, try that, and see the reactions, the response, and they come back, I'm like, that works, boom, done. I'm gonna make something out of that. So I'm also a PM for my side projects.
Yeah, great. I always say, that product manager have superpowers when they start as entrepreneurs. I was recently like reading a couple of articles in which it's called like the rising of CPOs,
Mm,
in which now is kind of usual to have CPOs becoming CEO. So the new CEO of YouTube is the former CPO, Google CEO is the former CPO, LinkedIn CEO is the former CPO. As entrepreneur as well, there are a lot of CPOs becoming their own startups.
right.
So what did you find similar? Because this is a side project that eventually is becoming something. Same thing as Product Heroes, in which I started to write something in Italian just as an hobby, and now is a company. But which similarities do you find between your day-to-day job in big tech as a PM and yeah, and like your solopreneur journey until now? Do you
Mm.
find any similarities?
I find similarities and synergies. Being a solopreneur, having these side projects, treating it like a product, like a company, has made me a much better product manager on my day-to-day job. Because before, when you're especially in big tech, that has been my career, there's processes and people and a bunch of resources that you can spend. If you need data, there's somebody who has done research or can do research for you, or can help you explore whatever it is that you need. But when you're on your own, you don't have a user researcher, you don't have a data scientist, you don't have a product marketing person. It's like, well, it's your company and it's up to you how you do it, right? So by having to go through that and be like, oh shoot, now I need to do data. How do I get this data? I'm going to measure something. Wait, does this metric actually mean something to me? Like, do I care? Can I make it actionable? And those are questions that I ask myself and that I need to figure out on my own in my solopreneurship. So when I get to my job as a product manager, it's the same thing. It's like, all right, we're measuring that metric. Is it really telling us something? Can we actually do something with it? Um, or when they tell us like, oh, this is the metric. No, I don't buy that. Like that's not what we should do, and here's why, right? And that's just an example in terms of metrics. So in terms of similarities, I think if you ask me, I believe that more product managers should also be solopreneurs, because I think it's a fantastic experience. Not everybody is built for being an entrepreneur. I certainly wasn't. That's why I've been my whole career in companies, small or large, but I've been in companies because I was always afraid of the risk. Now that I have this side project, I find ways to make it happen in between, and that could be a whole another episode on how to handle both things. But my point is that being a solopreneur is going through this experience by yourself, going through the risks and the needs, and learning how to prioritize, because again, you don't have resources. It's just you and your time, and learning what to focus on that is going to have the most impact is going to make you a better PM, because you're going to be applying the same principles on your day-to-day job.
Yeah, when you were talking about that, I read when I started to be like before a solopreneur and then an entrepreneur, I read the book. I don't remember the title is about the founder of Blackstone or BlackRock. I always
Mm.
get confused. The first chapter is called Made Not Born. And it related a lot to me and maybe to you as well, because I never thought in my life to be an entrepreneur. I've always been like a product guy, like someone who does things for others, but it's a journey and you can build your own. I mean, for me, it was all about trust, starting slow, getting trust, getting traction, putting the right metrics. I think the great advantage of being a solopreneur is basically that you cannot do most of the things you want to do. So you can do just very small things
Yeah.
and they have to have impact because you have no choice.
Right. Exactly. It's your, if you thought, I would, this would be, to me, this would be the key point to remember for anybody who's wondering about, what is it like to be a product manager versus a solopreneur. If you thought that as a product manager, you had to prioritize things and it was difficult, you need to be a solopreneur to really understand what it means to
You have no
prioritize.
idea.
It's 10 times harder.
What's the single most important skill for a PM? I'm referring like to normal product manager,
Mhm.
so not a manager or other
Yeah.
product manager. And it's very general. I know every PM is different, but
Right.
if there is just one skill, what would it be?
To me, would be empathy. Empathy not just for users, empathy for your team, for other members of the company, empathy for everyone around you. Because unless you're really in every conversation, in every meeting, in everything that you do, you take a moment to reflect what the other person is going through, what is important to them, what they care about. Unless you really do that, it's going to be incredibly hard to negotiate, to have conversations, to convince others, or to even be the devil's advocate in the room and saying, no, that's not the best thing for users, and here's why. So to me, above anything else, you could be, really terrible at some other stuff, but to me, you can't be bad at empathy.
What's your like the biggest mistake you made as a PM or as a solopreneur, if you prefer? And so what's the biggest learning you had?
Uh, that's a tough question. As a solopreneur, I've made tons of mistakes, but I've learned from every single one of them. So that's good. Now, let me focus on the PM side. I think some of the biggest mistakes that I've done as a PM is that, let me say two very quick. One, when I was more on the younger
Yeah.
side, or early career in product management, I kept coming from consulting and coming from an MBA. I was like, I want to prove that I can do this, that I'm the go getter, that I'm going to be the people that everyone's going to be like, oh, Diego is the kind of person that just goes and does something. So, long story short, the senior PM was just my boss, senior PM, and myself. Senior PM asked me like, "Hey, Diego, please go and take a list of customers. We'll create an email to invite them to our private beta for our new product. This was at Cisco, so large tech company, and we'll create an email. We'll invite them, and we'll do all that stuff. But for now, just go get the list." So younger version of me thought it would be a great idea to go get the list, craft the email, send it, and then come next day and be like, I've done everything. I'm super cool. So I did that, but what happened was that I was not super cool. What happened was that in the morning I don't know how many emails from sales guys yelling at me because I reach out to their customers bypassing sales and account teams. Many of those accounts have problems. My email was not very prescriptive on what exactly they were getting into, but some customers wanted to try things even though there were a ton of problems. So it was a complete mess. In the end, we actually ended up getting a few customers to try it out. My boss and the senior PM helped me provide air cover, but that gave me a big lesson on like, yes, you can have the spirit, you can really push things forward, but you can't skip a few things along the way. You can't skip the fact that if you're new, you're still learning, you need to just take a time to understand what is happening. So that was big mistake for me in early career. And then more on the later side, when I became a senior PM a couple years ago, I was working on a strategy for a document and for a product, and I was working on this strategy, and I thought I had a solid idea, and I was working with my team, with my manager. We kind of all bought into the plan, and I was like, all right, boom, done. We're ready. Let's go and execute. And we started executing and getting approvals for different things. And then one day, those around me came to me, was like, hey, have you socialized the strategy with, the broader team? Like, is the VP all the way to the VP level of approval? And I was like, oh no, I forgot about that. Because I was, fairly new to senior PM, and I was used to doing things slightly different, like more closely with my manager and further from VP. Again, think about a large company. So when I presented to the VP, he had so many pointers and things to change that I was like, oh shoot, we need to change or stop for a moment what we're doing to change direction, adjust, and then continue doing. So fortunately, nothing too bad happened, but it was a big moment for me that I can't, as a PM, as the most responsible person in the team for the product, I can't simply say, yep, approved by manager, boom, done, let's go. Like, I really need to socialize my strategy with as many people as I can, with as many levels above as I can, to make it solid, and then, cover my entire team to say, everyone's okay with this, let's go and execute.
This is why empathy is one of the most important
Yep.
skills, because you need to understand how fast you can go, how much you have to over-communicate,
Yep.
and
Exactly.
whatnot. Last question. Is always the same for all our guests. So if you had to leave just one single piece of advice to someone who wants to become a PM, so someone, as we were telling before, like a couple of years experience, maybe in marketing, maybe in tech, but never covered the PM role, what would it be, your single advice?
The most important thing you can do to make a jump into product management, regardless of your background, is to understand two things. Where do you want to go next? It's fine if it's Google, but figure out what exactly within Google, like figure out what's the role that you want to do next. And the second piece is, now that you know where you want to go next, what is the gap in your skills or your experience, and have a plan for it. If you don't have a plan, if all you do is your resume, you're not going to get that job.
Thank you very much, Diego. It's been great, a lot of great content, very detailed. I'm pretty sure that our community will love it, and we hope to host you one more time.
Marco, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be around.
Thank you very much. Ciao Diego.
Ciao.
Grazie per aver ascoltato questo episodio di Product Heroes. Se l'hai trovato utile, iscriviti su YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, insomma, dove ascolti i tuoi podcast normalmente, così non ti perderai neanche un episodio. Prima di andare via, vota con 5 stelline questo podcast o scrivi un commento, una recensione. Questo ci aiuterà a raggiungere sempre più persone e quindi aumentare la diffusione della cultura di prodotto in Italia, che poi è la nostra mission finale. Quindi il podcast è soltanto uno dei tanti modi che Product Heroes utilizza per spingere la cultura di prodotti. Trovi maggiori informazioni e tutte le attività che svolgiamo su productheroes.it, e soprattutto non perderti l'appuntamento più importante che stiamo spingendo negli ultimi mesi, che è la Product Heroes Conference, che sarà a Milano il 6 ottobre 2023. Anche su questo trovi tutte le info su productheroes.it. Ciao e alla prossima!